On the morning of June 25th, 2026, a series of verified tactical imagery surfaced across open-source intelligence networks. It depicted a highly symbolic yet deeply strategic event, the blue and yellow flag of Ukraine being raised over the windswept, heavily contested sand dunes of the Kinburn Peninsula. For 4 years, this narrow finger of land sticking out into the Black Sea served as a heavily fortified forward operating base for the Russian armed forces. From here, Russian long-range artillery systematically choked Ukraine's southern maritime commerce. Today, that fortress has broken. The Operational Tactical Group Odessa confirmed that Ukrainian elements had successfully executed a rapid amphibious flag-raising operation. But flags do not fly without deep structural shifts on the battlefield. The cracks in the Russian defense had begun showing days earlier. On June 22, Colonel Denis Nosov, the commander of OTG Odessa, announced that Russian forces occupying the Kinburn Spit were suffering from a catastrophic, irreversible logistical failure. Ukrainian first-person view loitering munitions and precision artillery had effectively severed the singular treacherous overland supply line feeding the peninsula. Deprived of heavy ammunition, vehicle fuel, and basic sustainment, the Russian garrison faced a choice: total annihilation or a desperate, chaotic evacuation. But Moscow was not ready to surrender this critical choke point without a fight. What followed was a highly aggressive, tech-driven counteroffensive from the sea, a last-ditch gamble that would ultimately demonstrate the shifting paradigm of modern naval doctrine. With Russian defensive lines buckling across northern Crimea and Kherson, the Kremlin chose to double down on the Kinburn axis. On June 23, 2026, the Russian Navy deployed an experimental high-stakes asset, a coordinated fleet of unmanned surface vessels, or USVs, racing at high speeds across the Black Sea toward the Ukrainian-controlled coastline. This was no ordinary naval raid. The Russian drone flotilla utilized a deeply ironic layer of technology integration with Starlink satellite communication terminals acquired via illicit third-party gray market networks. The vanguard of this assault force consisted of 2 primary platforms, the Skorupa and the Orkan-type unmanned surface vehicles packed with hundreds of kilograms of high-explosive payloads. In a striking admission of technological lag, Russian defense engineers had directly cloned the external hull profiles and hydrodynamic structures of Ukraine's highly successful Magura 5.5 and Sea-Baby drone models. Built from low observable fiberglass and radar-absorbent composite materials, these low-profile vessels were designed to skim mere centimeters above the water's surface, minimizing their radar cross-section. The hulls were coated in specialized matte black anti-reflective paint, and their internal combustion engine exhausts were routed directly underwater to suppress their thermal signature against Western-supplied infrared sensors. Moscow's operational intent was clear: test the structural integrity of Ukraine's southern coastal defense grid and temporarily break the operational stranglehold around the Kinburn Spit. However, the Russian offensive doctrine suffered from a fundamental flaw. It underestimated Ukraine's integrated multi-domain surveillance architecture. Long before the Russian USVs could reach their optimal deployment zones, they walked directly into a digital dragnet. Ukrainian military intelligence, leveraging advanced littoral radar networks, acoustic signature arrays along the coastline, and overhead aerial reconnaissance, locked onto the abnormal surface wake south of Ochakiv. According to Serhiy Flash-Basnov, a senior technological advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, the kinetic interception was initiated precisely at 4 a.m. under a tightly coordinated command and control framework. Ukraine did not risk expensive naval hulls to counter the threat. Instead, the Southern Defense Forces deployed an asset that has repeatedly redefined modern localized conflicts, the Bayraktar TB2 medium-altitude long-endurance armed UAV. Operating at an altitude of approximately 16,000 feet out of range of localized short-range air defense systems, the TB2's high-definition electro-optical and infrared sensors tracked the individual telemetry of the incoming Russian sea drones. Armed with MAML smart precision-guided micro-munitions, the Turkish-manufactured drones executed a highly unorthodox tactical solution. Instead of aiming for the waterlines or explosive compartments, the TB2 operators targeted the exposed Starlink communication domes mounted on the upper structures of the Skororupa and Orkan vessels. The tactical effect was instantaneous. Stripped of their high-bandwidth satellite uplink to Russian command centers, the autonomous vessels lost situational awareness. They immediately began drifting aimlessly, effectively blinded. Exposed and stationary in the open waters near the Kinburn Strait, the disabled Russian fleet was systematically obliterated by a combination of MAML strikes from above and heavy coastal defense artillery batteries firing from the shore. The Russian maritime gambit had ended in complete tactical failure before it ever reached effective weapon delivery range. To understand why the Kremlin risked its most advanced, unproven autonomous naval assets in this specific engagement, one must analyze the raw geography of the region. The primary objective of the Russian USV fleet was the total disruption of the heavily fortified coastal zone of the Mykolaiv and Kherson oblasts, specifically targeting the port infrastructure of Ochakiv. Ochakiv is a critical strategic choke point. It sits precisely at the narrow mouth where the Dnieper and southern Bug rivers converge before emptying into the broader Black Sea basin. Whoever controls Ochakiv directly controls the maritime flow into Ukraine's industrial heartland, historically hosting a U.S.-funded maritime operations center. Prior to the full-scale escalation, Ochakiv remains a foundational node for securing the Western Black Sea grain corridor. For weeks, Russia's elite 337th Airborne Regiment, a veteran VDV formation, had been enduring a meat-grinder logistical siege on the Spit. The peninsula's singular land connection had been turned into a free-fire zone by Ukrainian long-range artillery and HIMARS strikes. Bridges along the critical M17 and M18 highways linking Kherson to the Crimean interior were systematically degraded. Intercepted intelligence reports gathered by the Crimea-based Atesh partisan network detailed a complete breakdown in combat readiness within the 337th, characterized by chronic shortages of potable water, medical supplies, and ammunition. The naval attack was a desperate attempt to throw a lifeline to a dying garrison. Instead, its failure sealed their fate. From a broader global military perspective, the Kinburn collapse and the subsequent naval engagement provide a case study for the total subversion of traditional 20th century naval warfare doctrines. The Russian Federation on paper boasts a blue water navy featuring heavily armed guided missile cruisers, frigates, and attack submarines. Yet Ukraine, a nation without a single operational large surface combatant, has effectively forced the Russian Black Sea Fleet to abandon its historic forward bases in Sevastopol and retreat to Novorossiysk. Furthermore, the Ukrainian Security Service, or SBU, continues to field the heavier Sea Baby multi-purpose drone. These units are true ship killers, boasting ranges exceeding 1,000 kilometers and a massive 1-ton explosive capacity. Ukrainian engineers have converted these platforms into highly modular combat systems, integrating laser-guided anti-tank guided missiles, Shmel thermobaric rocket launchers, and even modified R-73 air-to-air missiles to counter Russian combat helicopters. As the Kinburn Peninsula transitions firmly back to Ukrainian operational control, the strategic horizon for the Black Sea Basin looks increasingly bleak for the Kremlin. Kyiv is no longer limiting its naval drone operations to the surface. Industrial-scale production has begun on the Toloka and Marichka series of unmanned underwater vehicles, or UUVs. The Toloka TLK-150 and the massive TLK-1000 extra-large UUV models represent an invisible, highly lethal subterranean threat. These systems possess the capability to loiter completely submerged on the seabed for weeks at a time, emitting zero acoustic signature, waiting for a high-value target to cross their operational envelope. Simultaneously, the Sea Trident ST-1000 heavy underwater drone is specifically engineered with a 1-ton payload designed to obliterate the reinforced concrete pillars of maritime bridges. The viability of this technology was proven in a spectacular covert operation where a Ukrainian submersible drone successfully infiltrated the heavily defended inner harbor of Novorossiysk, heavily damaging a Russian Kilo-class diesel-electric submarine. In response, the Russian military command has resorted to desperate medieval-style defensive measures. Around the critical Kerch Strait Bridge, the primary logistical artery connecting mainland Russia to occupied Crimea, the Russian military has sunk old transport ships, deployed heavy barges, and stretched massive steel anti-torpedo nets across the shipping channels. High-speed Project 12,200 patrol craft maintain 24-hour schedules, firing heavy machine guns at any anomalous surface disturbances, while navalized Panzer M air defense systems scan the horizon. Yet defensive walls throughout military history have ultimately proven to be static monuments to tactical failures. By securing the Kinburn Peninsula, Ukraine has fundamentally expanded its launch architecture. The Kerch Bridge, the Russian shadow fleet operating in the southern Black Sea, and the remaining naval strongholds are now locked within an inescapable ring of autonomous surface, aerial, and subsurface strike assets. The question is no longer whether Ukraine can defeat one of the world's largest conventional navies without a fleet of its own. That question has been answered. The only question that remains is when Kyiv will choose to execute the final coordinated multi-domain strike that will cut Crimea off from the Russian mainland entirely. Let us know your strategic breakdown in the comments below. Thank you for watching.